So for much of the past 2 summers, I've spent my time working in the lab of Dr. Inez Rogotsky at the Hospital for Special Surgery Research Institute. Dr. Rogotsky and all the amazing researchers in her lab study the pathogenesis of various inflammatory diseases. But in more simple terms, she studies the internal mechanisms and the development of various autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis. But don't worry, I'm not here today to talk about the research work I was a part of during my time at the lab. Rather, I want to explore what I learned about science in general, the process of discovery, the struggle for funding, and the demand for results, and what the future of the field looks like within the context of our current political climate. And to me, there's no better place to start this discussion than the idea of the breakthrough, the magical discovery often years in the making. Right? For Newton, it was gravity. For Darwin, it was evolution. And for Rosalind Franklin, it was a double helix structure held by DNA. This is photo 51, for people who aren't, might not be familiar. And for our lab, it was this most recent publication of a paper called Disrupting the RNA Polymerase II Transcription Cycle Through CDK7 Inhibition Ameliorates Inflammatory Arthritis. And I know that is a total mouthful. But it was a feat more than 5 years in the making for our lab. And to put this into more simple and more understandable words, we essentially found that blocking a very simple enzyme can impede inflammatory arthritis development in mice and human cell samples. And this brings me to one of the first lessons I learned. Science can be quite slow. My time working and learning in our lab showed me just how much time and work goes into each and every discovery, to each paper, small or large. It's a process that takes years of daily work by graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, lab technicians, and a slew of high school and undergraduate interns and volunteers like myself. My mentor, who was an early PhD student, and I, we spent most of our time doing housekeeping tasks. We took care of mice, we genotyped them, and we bred them for future experiments. We isolated cells for later treatment and analysis, and we validated assays for our various areas of interest. And what I learned is that it's no wonder that important questions take years to have a published answer when simple and foundational tasks demand so much time and detail. I realized that as our world has learned more and more, the precision and attention to detail needed to observe new phenomena has only increased, especially when we study molecules and complexes that are microscopically small. Right? The questions that are left are harder than ever to solve. But it's sort of a curse of knowledge, right? And even though this may be the case, the overall volume of published output has only grown and grown over the years. There's more scientists in the world and more research being done. Now, I want to share with you all a quote. It's from Paul Rand and Professor James Evans at the University of Chicago. And they say that science is facing a perplexing problem. Although there are far more scientists today than ever before, publishing research at a faster and faster pace, new and novel advancements have slowed down and not increased. Right? Our world learns more and more every day, but it's harder than ever to solve the most difficult questions. And this can be an incredibly rewarding process when a hunch or a faint idea turns into a meaningful development, but also a very frustrating one when experiments break down and plans that are months in the making fall apart. I felt these emotions on my own much smaller scale when my genotyping yielded good results, or a primer I developed worked well in an experiment, but also when these same exact labors fell apart after hours or days of work. And I've learned to embrace this process, regardless of the results, and to understand that in the grand scheme of things, my efforts were never in vain. But unfortunately, the results researchers who do this more professionally than I do, the results that they obtain through their lab work bears an incredible significance for themselves and their principal investigator. One of the things I saw firsthand last summer was just how political and results-oriented the scientific community can be. As much as science is seen as a pure field, where knowledge and integrity reign supreme, it's controlled by funding and grants, and PIs and graduate students needing to secure their own careers. So last summer, our lab dealt with the loss of one of our grants, and this was a blow of hundreds of thousands of dollars to future research efforts. This forced our PI, Dr. Rogotsky, a leading expert in her field, and a member of grant writing committees herself, to seek additional funding for the years to come, a process which extended well beyond my time there. And while I understand the importance of the system of grants in a world where everything does cost money, I also believe this system can create conflicts of interest. Right? Researchers are pushed not only to make progress and create knowledge in their field, but to publish a competitive volume of work in industry journals to continue to secure funding and advance their own careers through academia. And, okay, so this right here is a paper mill, but obviously, as you probably can tell, I'm not here to talk about, thank you, Mr. G, for laughing. I'm not here to talk about paper production, because in the context of scientific journals, a paper mill is a business which publishes plagiarized, fraudulent, or sort of otherwise unprofessional data, right? And they sell author designations on these papers. And one of the things that I found incredibly shocking is that this global phenomenon is credited with anywhere between 2 and 20% of the total volume of the scientific world's published work. But I'm not saying that esteemed faculty or students at American research institutions are at all involved in these schemes. I'm not saying that this happens at any meaningful scale at the institutions we tend to trust. But there have been instances in which well-respected researchers have been implicated in fraudulent data scandals. Okay, so this is physicist Ranga Diaz, and he was a professor at the University of Rochester until a few months ago. And his area of interest was superconductors, which are materials that electricity can flow through without resistance, and they expel a powerful magnetic field at the same time. And for a very, very long time, identifying materials with the properties of superconductors at room temperature have been totally impossible, despite their potential for use in energy, technology, and transportation. But in 2020, Dr. Diaz claimed to have discovered a room temperature superconductor. And this was a breakthrough he even thought could win him a Nobel Prize. But during the peer review process, many independent researchers raised concerns with his data, and his paper was eventually retracted. In 2022, he made similar claims about a different material once again, but once again, the journal Nature refused to publish his data after collaborators of his raised concerns. And subsequent investigations flagged other papers of his as well, and his thesis, and much of his research is now under review. And although he lost his position as a professor at Rochester, he co-founded a company called Unearthly Materials using the data he claimed to have discovered. And he attracted an incredible amount of publicity and raised millions of dollars. But I don't highlight the story of Dr. Diaz or talk about paper mills to discredit the process of scientific research in any way. I only raise it to say that the field of science suffers from the same ethical and moral dilemmas of any other discipline, and that the pressures of money, personal credit, fame, and career progression should be considered. I mean, just look at the challenges our world is currently facing, right? Climate change, infectious diseases, bird flu. These are all threats which the scientific community is uniquely equipped to tackle. It's important to have faith in research institutions and to continue to work towards breakthroughs. Through my experience in the Rozoff lab and the Fields and Science Research Program, I've learned so much about the genes and signaling molecules that we study. But I think I've learned just as much about the world of scientific research as a whole, and all the forces that influence it. As unbiased and simply objective of a field of science is thought to be, I've grown to see that it experiences the same economic, political, and interpersonal pressures of any other space. Now, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Church, who I hear is, in the building tonight. Because he loves to tell our class how he thinks we should all pursue careers in politics if we want to make an impact in the world. And I find it ironic because next year, as I move off to college, I plan to study biology. I want to pursue a career in science and medicine and use my time to help others. But I do see exactly what he means. Science reflects the will of the world we live in. Research requires funding, policy measures, and public support, and a culture oriented to discovery, and to the creation and preservation of knowledge and the truth. Thank you.